When most people think of Connecticut, they picture quintessential New England charm, meticulously maintained colonial homes nestled among vibrant fall foliage, upscale boutiques lining historic main streets, and prosperous residents enjoying lattes at sophisticated cafes. This carefully cultivated image of affluence and tranquility has become synonymous with the state's identity. However, beneath this polished exterior lies a far more complex and troubling reality that challenges our perceptions of one of America's wealthiest states. Connecticut stands as a stark embodiment of economic inequality in modern America. Statistical analysis reveals that the wealthiest 1% of Connecticut residents earn an astonishing 37 times more than the remaining 99% of the population. This dramatic wealth disparity places Connecticut among the most economically divided states in the entire nation, creating a two-tiered society where prosperity and poverty exist in uncomfortable proximity. What makes this divide particularly poignant is how it manifests in the state's smaller communities. While larger cities often attract attention when discussing urban challenges, Connecticut's small towns quietly grapple with their own constellation of difficulties. Entrenched poverty that spans generations, escalating crime rates that shatter the illusion of suburban safety, stagnant population growth that signals declining opportunity, and housing costs that defy economic logic. These communities may appear peaceful from the outside, but their residents face daily struggles that contradict the state's affluent reputation. This comprehensive examination explores 15 small towns across Connecticut that exemplify these hidden challenges. Our analysis considers multiple dimensions of community well-being, economic vitality and employment opportunities, educational quality and student achievement, public safety and crime statistics, housing affordability and market stability, infrastructure and transportation systems, and the intangible quality of life factors that determine whether a place feels like home or merely a way station. Before we get into the specifics of any particular communities, it's really important to understand the methodology behind how these struggling towns are identified. The designation of worst isn't something that's just thrown around or meant to stigmatize the folks who live in these places. Instead, it's based on an evidence-driven assessment, and it takes into account quantifiable data across a bunch of different categories that have a real impact on daily life. Economic indicators are, honestly, the backbone of our analysis. We're talking about things like unemployment rates, which give us a sense of the job market's health, poverty levels that show how widespread financial hardship is, median household incomes that reflect what people are actually earning, trends in business growth or decline that hint at the area's economic direction, and of course housing market dynamics, which really affect both affordability and stability for residents. Quality of life metrics are just as crucial, you know. These include educational performance, which we measure through standardized test scores and graduation rates, crime statistics that cover both violent offenses and property crimes, access to healthcare and the availability of facilities, recreational opportunities and community amenities, and finally, transportation infrastructure that connects people to jobs, schools, and other opportunities. Finally, demographic trends offer, some really crucial context. We're talking about population changes that reveal whether people are choosing to stay or leave, age distribution that indicates community vitality, diversity metrics that reflect social composition, and migration patterns that show movement in and out of communities. By examining these interconnected factors, we can, I think, develop a nuanced understanding of why certain towns struggle, even though they're right here in one of America's wealthiest states. Our journey begins in Terryville, a small community within Plymouth that really epitomizes the gap between appearance and reality. At first glance, Terryville presents itself as an unremarkable but pleasant New England village. The streets are quiet, historic homes display classic colonial architecture, and the pace of life moves at a measured, almost leisurely tempo. Yet beneath this ordinary facade, fundamental problems erode the community's foundation. Education represents Terryville's most pressing concern. Student proficiency rates have plummeted below 50%, a deeply troubling benchmark for any community but particularly alarming for a small town, where educational quality often determines whether families choose to establish long-term roots. When half or more of students fail to meet basic academic standards, it signals systemic failures that extend beyond individual schools to encompass resources, teaching quality, parental involvement, and community support structures. Perhaps even more unusual is Terryville's disproportionate number of vehicle-related incidents. Despite relatively light traffic compared to urban areas, police reports consistently document an unexpectedly high frequency of car accidents, traffic violations, and even police pursuits. This pattern creates an atmosphere of unpredictability, where the simple act of driving through town carries unexpected risks. The town's history as part of Plymouth dates back generations, and many residential properties carry the weight of that heritage. Older homes possess undeniable charm, evoking nostalgia for simpler times. However, this historical legacy has become something of a burden rather than an asset. Maintenance costs for aging housing stock strain family budgets, while the town struggles year after year to modernize infrastructure and services without losing its historical character. Terryville represents a community trapped in an uncomfortable limbo, unable to fully embrace either preservation or progress. Families considering relocation often visit, appreciate the quiet streets and historic ambiance, but ultimately choose communities with stronger schools and more stable civic infrastructure. This pattern of consideration, followed by rejection, perpetuates a cycle where the town continually reaches for stability but never quite achieves it. Transitioning from educational concerns to economic accessibility, we arrive at Sharon, a small town in Litchfield County that presents an entirely different set of challenges. Sharon embodies natural beauty and New England aesthetic perfection. Rolling hills carpeted and verdant forests surround the town. Historic structures display impeccable preservation, and the overall atmosphere exudes refined tranquility. This picturesque setting has made Sharon a favorite retreat for wealthy individuals seeking escape from urban intensity. However, this exclusivity comes at a substantial price that effectively prices out average families. Sharon's cost of living index registers at 122.6, representing an expense level that exceeds the national average by more than 22%. Housing, groceries, services, and basic necessities all carry premium price tags that reflect the town's elite character rather than economic necessity. Beyond mere expense, Sharon suffers from a profound quietness that transcends peaceful relaxation and enters the realm of isolation. The town lacks a vibrant downtown district where residents naturally congregate. Entertainment options are virtually non-existent, forcing residents to travel significant distances for dining, cultural activities, or even basic social interaction. Evening hours bring an almost eerie silence, as businesses close early and streets empty of pedestrian traffic. The community's small, stable population reinforces this sense of suspended animation. People remain, but life seems to unfold in slow motion, lacking the energy and dynamism that characterizes thriving communities. Sharon occupies a peculiar position as an expensive community that offers limited return on that investment for residents seeking active community engagement. For families with school-aged children, young professionals seeking social connections, or anyone who values community vitality alongside natural beauty, Sharon presents a paradox. It's undeniably beautiful and offers peace that money can buy, but it simultaneously feels hollow, like a meticulously maintained museum where people happen to live but don't quite thrive. The town serves the wealthy seeking seasonal retreat far better than it serves year-round residents seeking community. From expensive isolation, we move to Derby, a town grappling with the aftermath of industrial decline and its attendant social problems. Derby's location along the Housatonic River once positioned it as a significant manufacturing center. Factories and warehouses lined the riverbanks, providing employment for generations of residents and creating a prosperous working-class community with strong social bonds and economic security. The collapse of Connecticut's manufacturing sector hit Derby particularly hard. As factories closed and jobs disappeared, the economic foundation that sustained the community crumbled. Unemployment rose, property values declined, and younger residents began leaving in search of opportunities elsewhere. This economic deterioration created secondary effects that compound the town's challenges. Property crime has emerged as a significant concern, kind of disproportionate to Derby's small population. Theft, burglary, and vandalism occur with troubling frequency, creating an atmosphere of insecurity among residents. Even simple activities like parking vehicles or leaving homes unattended for vacation carry a heightened risk. These crime patterns reflect deeper social dysfunction, really driven by economic desperation and reduced community cohesion. The physical landscape of Derby tells the story of decline. Abandoned factory buildings stand as hollow monuments to past prosperity, and their broken windows and crumbling facades serve as constant reminders of what was lost. Some structures have been repurposed or demolished, but, many remain, creating pockets of blight that drag down surrounding neighborhoods. Derby's strategic river location and proximity to larger cities should, in theory, position it for revitalization. The bones of a functional community remain intact, with residential neighborhoods, commercial districts, and transportation infrastructure. However, translating potential into reality requires investment, vision, and, honestly, sustained effort that has thus far eluded the community. Derby remains frozen in a transitional state, no longer the prosperous industrial town it once was, but unable to define and achieve a viable future identity. Willimantic presents one of Connecticut's most intriguing contradictions. It's a town just brimming with artistic energy and cultural diversity, yet at the same time, it struggles with some pretty severe economic deprivation. The community has really cultivated a distinctive personality that sets it apart from Connecticut's more conventional towns. Colorful murals adorn building facades, independent art galleries showcase local talent, and cultural festivals bring residents together in celebration of the town's diversity. The presence of a nearby university injects youthful energy and progressive values into the community. Students frequent local businesses, participate in community initiatives, and contribute to an atmosphere of intellectual curiosity. This college town element provides Willimantic with cultural resources and social dynamism that, honestly, many similarly sized communities just don't have. However, these positive attributes exist alongside crushing poverty. Willimantic's poverty rate stands at 26.8%, which, significantly exceeds both state and national averages. More than 1 in 4 residents lives below the poverty line, struggling to afford basic necessities while the cost of living just keeps rising. This economic reality, it strains social services, educational institutions, healthcare facilities, and community organizations that work overtime to address persistent need. The town's history as a textile manufacturing center left behind impressive 19th-century brick buildings that once housed mills and factories. Some have been successfully repurposed into housing, offices, or commercial spaces, but, honestly, many stand vacant or underutilized, representing both historical legacy and contemporary challenge. Willimantic's famous Frog Bridge has become an unlikely symbol of the town's quirky character. This unique infrastructure features bronze frogs adorning the bridge railings, celebrating local history while providing a distinctive landmark. The bridge really exemplifies how Willimantic embraces creativity and humor despite economic adversity. The town possesses genuine community spirit and cultural richness that money cannot easily buy. Residents demonstrate resilience and maintain pride in their distinctive community character. However, economic reality constrains possibilities and creates daily hardships that artistic festivals and creative energy cannot fully ameliorate. Willimantic needs economic opportunity that matches its cultural vitality, allowing residents to thrive rather than merely survive. Hazardville, technically part of Enfield rather than an independent municipality, carries one of Connecticut's most evocative place names. This nomenclature derives from the town's historical role as a gunpowder manufacturing center, an industrial legacy that shaped community development for generations. Remnants of this explosive past literally remain scattered through surrounding forests, where abandoned factory structures slowly succumb to nature's reclamation. While this history provides colorful context, Hazardville's contemporary challenges center on economic stagnation and limited opportunity. The job market presents perhaps the most daunting obstacle facing residents. Unemployment rates exceed comfortable levels, but more troubling is the projected job growth rate of merely 29%. This anemic projection suggests that employment opportunities will remain scarce, forcing young people to seek their fortunes elsewhere. The community's physical appearance reinforces this sense of stagnation. Historic homes display the architectural character of earlier eras, but many require maintenance that owners cannot afford. Streets remain quiet not with the comfortable silence of safety and contentment, but with the oppressive stillness of decline. Empty storefronts and minimal commercial activity really create an atmosphere of abandonment. So, Hazardville's geographical location really does contribute to its difficulties. While it's not, impossibly remote, the community just doesn't have convenient connections to Connecticut's major employment centers. Folks living here face these lengthy commutes if they want to reach cities with robust job markets, and honestly, public transportation options are still pretty limited. This kind of isolation creates a very real, practical barrier to opportunity, basically trapping residents in a place with not many local employment options and, tough access to opportunities elsewhere. The name Hazardville has, in a way, become kind of prophetic. Not because of any explosive dangers, but because living here really does mean hazarding your economic future. Young people graduating from high school are faced with some stark choices. Either accept the limited local prospects or, leave the community entirely. This ongoing pattern of youth outmigration slowly drains the town of energy and potential, aging the population and, over time, further diminishing its economic vitality. Ansonia, on the other hand, occupies this uncomfortable middle ground between its industrial past and an uncertain future, struggling to define an identity that both honors its heritage and embraces contemporary needs. The town's historic downtown has these handsome brick buildings from its manufacturing heyday, which, I have to say, create a visual appeal that suggests a greater prosperity than the current reality. Traffic incidents and pedestrian safety have actually emerged as unexpected focal points of community concern. Even though the traffic volumes here are pretty modest compared to bigger cities, Ansonia shows up in local news with surprising frequency because of vehicle accidents and pedestrian strikes. Property damage from automotive incidents happens at rates that seem, honestly, disproportionate to the town's size and traffic density. Interestingly, these traffic-related problems contrast with relatively low rates of other crime categories. Violent crime and property offenses remain manageable, suggesting that basic public safety is maintained. However, the specific pattern of vehicle-related incidents points to infrastructure deficiencies, inadequate traffic management, or behavioral patterns that create unnecessary danger. Ansonia's economic growth proceeds at a glacial pace, providing insufficient momentum to drive meaningful community improvement. Business development remains modest, employment opportunities expand slowly, and population growth stagnates. This lack of dynamism prevents Ansonia from generating the tax revenue and civic energy necessary for infrastructure investment and service enhancement. Public transportation limitations compound accessibility challenges. Residents without personal vehicles face significant difficulties commuting to employment, accessing healthcare, or participating in activities beyond walking distance. This transportation gap particularly affects lower-income residents, elderly citizens, and others for whom car ownership represents an unaffordable luxury. The town seems perpetually caught between two futures, embracing modernization and becoming a commuter suburb with contemporary amenities, or preserving its industrial character and accepting a more limited economic trajectory. This indecision prevents decisive action in either direction, leaving Ansonia suspended in limbo, neither fully honoring its past nor successfully building its future. So, New London should theoretically thrive. Its coastal location provides natural advantages that, honestly, many inland communities would envy. The presence of a working port generates economic activity and employment, Ferry services connect the city to nearby islands and other coastal destinations. A naval base brings federal employment and economic stability, and, historic architecture and maritime heritage offer cultural assets that could drive tourism and community pride. Despite these advantages, New London struggles with multiple interconnected challenges that prevent the city from reaching its potential. Property crime rates exceed acceptable levels, creating insecurity among residents and deterring business investment. Theft, burglary, and vandalism occur with troubling frequency, suggesting inadequate law enforcement resources or, maybe deeper social dysfunction that manifests in property crime. The local economy underperforms relative to the city's strategic assets. Commercial districts show visible signs of decline, with vacant storefronts and underutilized properties. The harbor area, which should serve as a vibrant waterfront destination, often feels surprisingly quiet and underdeveloped. Opportunities for dining, entertainment, and recreation remain limited compared to what the location could support. Perhaps most frustratingly, New London's cost of living fails to align with the quality of life delivered. Housing costs, taxes, and general expenses remain elevated, reflecting Connecticut's overall expense level rather than offering any discount for the challenges residents endure. This mismatch between cost and value creates affordability problems that drive families to seek better returns on their housing investment elsewhere. The city's development feels perpetually unstable, lurching between modest improvements and setbacks without establishing sustainable upward trajectory. Revitalization initiatives begin with enthusiasm but often stall or deliver disappointing results. This pattern of unfulfilled promise creates community frustration and skepticism about future improvement prospects. New London possesses genuine assets and potential that distinguish it from landlocked communities with fewer inherent advantages. However, translating coastal location, historic architecture, and existing infrastructure into actual prosperity requires overcoming social challenges, crime concerns, and economic stagnation that currently constrain possibilities. The city needs comprehensive revitalization that addresses multiple problems simultaneously, rather than piecemeal efforts that deliver marginal improvements. Bethel presents perhaps the most jarring disconnect between appearance and reality on this list. The town's aesthetic suggests comfortable suburban normalcy. Residential neighborhoods display well-maintained homes, streets remain clean and orderly, and the overall impression suggests a peaceful community where families can raise children without fear. Statistical reality tells a different story. Random crime risk registers at concerning levels for a community of Bethel's size and character. More troublingly, the town has experienced several severe violent incidents that shattered its tranquil image. Knife fights, physical assaults, and even a fatal stabbing brought unwelcome attention to Bethel, forcing residents to confront the reality that serious violence can erupt even in seemingly safe suburban communities. These incidents appear somewhat random rather than concentrated in specific troubled neighborhoods or linked to obvious social dysfunction. This unpredictability creates particular unease, as residents cannot easily identify and avoid problem areas. The sense that violence might occur anywhere at any time proves more psychologically disturbing than predictable crime patterns concentrated in known troubled districts. So, Bethel's physical development really shows these uneven growth patterns. Older sections of town, they hold on to that traditional New England character and charm. But, on the other hand, newer developments often just don't have the same architectural care or community integration. This ends up creating kind of a patchwork quality, where different areas feel disconnected from each other, rather than being parts of a cohesive whole. Population turnover rates, well, they suggest there's just limited community attachment here. A lot of families move to Bethel, stay for, relatively brief periods, and then relocate somewhere else. This kind of transience really prevents the development of deep community bonds and long-term civic investment. The town honestly feels more like a temporary landing spot than a permanent home for many residents. The combination of unexpected violence, moderate population density that gives neither urban anonymity nor small-town intimacy, and this sense of impermanence all together creates an unsettled community atmosphere. Bethel really needs to address both the actual crime problems and the psychological impact of those high-profile violent incidents that have damaged the community's sense of security. Winsted occupies prime real estate in northwestern Connecticut, surrounded by natural beauty that, honestly, should make it a really desirable destination. There's a scenic lake here that provides all sorts of recreational opportunities and, just adds so much visual appeal. Rolling hills create these dramatic landscapes that change spectacularly with the seasons. Plus, historic buildings reflect the town's long history and architectural heritage. However, economic reality severely contradicts aesthetic appeal. Unemployment rates significantly exceed state and national averages, which indicates a local job market that's just unable to provide sufficient employment opportunities. Poverty levels remain elevated, with many families struggling to meet basic needs, even though they're living in one of America's wealthiest states. Most paradoxically, housing costs remain stubbornly high, despite, weak local economics. Home prices and rental rates that might be justifiable in prosperous communities with strong job markets make little sense in Winsted's context of high unemployment and poverty. This disconnect between housing expense and local economic capacity creates severe affordability problems, forcing residents to dedicate disproportionate shares of income to housing while struggling to afford other necessities. The combination of high unemployment, elevated poverty, and expensive housing creates a financial vice that, honestly, squeezes residents from multiple directions simultaneously. Families cannot find adequate employment locally, lack resources to relocate to areas with better job markets, and struggle to afford housing even in their economically depressed community. This trap keeps people in Winsted not by choice but by lack of alternatives. Local businesses struggle for survival in this challenging economic environment. Limited consumer spending power constrains retail opportunities, while service businesses find insufficient customer bases to achieve viability. Commercial vacancies dot the downtown area, and entrepreneurs hesitate to invest in new ventures given, these difficult market conditions. Winsted's natural assets and historical character create potential for tourism development or, attracting remote workers who are seeking a better quality of life. However, realizing this potential really requires some infrastructure investment, business development support, and, addressing the economic fundamentals that currently constrain community prosperity. The town waits for a revival that has been perpetually promised but, honestly, never quite arrives. Torrington stands out as the most urban community on this list, with a population and density that really distinguish it from the purely small-town entries. This urban character should, at least in theory, provide advantages through greater commercial activity, more diverse employment opportunities, enhanced services, and, the energy that population density can generate. The opioid epidemic has hit Torrington with devastating force, The community has become one of Connecticut's most severely affected areas, with addiction, overdoses, and drug-related crime creating these cascading social problems. Public spaces like parks that should serve as community assets sometimes become sites of drug activity, which, unfortunately, deters families from utilizing these resources. Emergency services respond to overdose calls with heartbreaking frequency. Treatment facilities struggle to meet overwhelming demand. Downtown Torrington contains genuine artistic and cultural resources that really differentiate it from many similarly sized communities. Theaters host performances, galleries display local artwork, and cultural events bring residents together. These assets represent real community strengths that could, serve as foundations for broader revitalization. However, cultural resources cannot overcome economic fundamentals. Many neighborhoods display visible deterioration, with poorly maintained properties, commercial vacancies, and infrastructure showing deferred maintenance. Population growth has stalled, suggesting that more people choose to leave than arrive. Buildings throughout the city display neglect, creating an overall impression of decline. Torrington possesses a more substantial foundation than many struggling small towns. Its size provides critical mass for supporting businesses, services, and institutions that purely rural communities cannot sustain. However, this foundation is crumbling under the weight of poverty, addiction, and economic stagnation. The city needs comprehensive intervention, addressing drug treatment, economic development, housing improvement, and social services simultaneously, rather than isolated programs tackling individual symptoms of broader dysfunction. Groton holds the distinction of hosting the U.S. Navy's submarine base, a major military installation that shapes the community's identity and economy. This federal presence should theoretically provide economic stability through consistent employment, federal spending, and the businesses that arise to serve military personnel and their families. Housing costs present significant challenges, particularly given inconsistent correlation with quality and location. Rental properties near the base command premium prices driven by military demand and housing allowances. Civilian residents without access to military benefits face these same inflated costs while earning typical Connecticut wages that haven't kept pace with housing expenses. Educational quality registers as adequate but unexceptional, disappointing given the resources that military presence supposedly brings. Schools serve a transient population as military families rotate through assignments, creating continuity challenges and preventing accumulation of institutional knowledge. Civilian students from lower-income families often struggle in schools designed around more affluent military-connected peers. Infrastructure development has lagged behind population growth and changing needs. Public facilities, recreational amenities, and commercial offerings haven't kept pace with the community's expansion. Roads experience congestion, parking proves inadequate, and community spaces remain insufficient for the population density. Seymour, really embodies one of Connecticut's most peculiar housing market paradoxes. At first glance, it just seems like a prosperous small town where families would, eagerly want to put down roots. The community looks well-maintained, the streets are safe and clean, and honestly, the whole atmosphere just gives off this vibe of suburban contentment. But then, the housing numbers, they reveal some truly startling dysfunction. Housing costs here are, get this, 23% higher than the national average, which is already a pretty hefty premium. Even more surprising, Seymour's housing prices are 91% above the Connecticut state average. And considering Connecticut is already one of America's most expensive states for housing, this extra premium puts Seymour's housing costs at, stratospheric levels that, frankly, just defy logical explanation. Now, these extreme costs are happening even though there's only modest economic growth, limited job opportunities, and honestly, no real scarcity factors that would make these prices make sense. The town's population hasn't surged, so there aren't any real supply constraints. There's been no big employer moving in to drive up demand with new workers. Seymour just, well, costs way more than similar communities, and there's really no clear reason why. Compounding this puzzle, vacancy rates remain elevated. Empty housing units sit on the market while prices remain stubbornly high, suggesting a dysfunctional market where sellers maintain unrealistic price expectations rather than adjusting to actual demand. This combination of high prices and significant vacancies indicates speculation, artificial scarcity, or market dysfunction rather than genuine supply-demand imbalances. For families considering Seymour, the housing market creates a prohibitive barrier. Even households with solid incomes find themselves priced out of home ownership, or, forced to dedicate unsustainable portions of income to housing costs. Renters face similarly inflated costs without the long-term equity building that, at least in theory, justifies expensive home purchases. The town's economy fails to generate momentum that would justify housing costs. Business growth proceeds slowly, job creation remains modest, and commercial development offers limited excitement. Nothing about Seymour's economic trajectory suggests the kind of explosive growth that drives, legitimate housing price increases. Seymour needs market correction that realigns housing costs with economic fundamentals. Current pricing creates artificial barriers that prevent family formation, limit economic mobility, and ultimately constrain the community's growth potential. The town risks becoming an expensive ghost town where properties remain valuable on paper, but, honestly, increasingly difficult to actually sell or rent at asking prices. North Canaan and Canaan, really function as twin communities sharing geography, challenges, and an unfortunate reputation as Connecticut's most problematic areas for drunk driving. While driving under the influence is, inexcusable no matter the circumstances, these towns have earned particular notoriety for the frequency and severity of DUI incidents. Police reports consistently document alcohol-impaired driving at rates that far exceed both state and national averages. This pattern creates danger for all road users, since impaired drivers pose unpredictable threats through erratic operation, reduced reaction times, and poor judgment. The concentration of DUI incidents suggests inadequate enforcement, limited alternative transportation, cultural factors that normalize heavy drinking, or, sometimes combinations of these elements. Beyond drunk driving, both communities suffer from underdeveloped public infrastructure and commercial amenities. Retail options are, honestly, severely limited, forcing residents to travel significant distances for shopping, dining, or entertainment. Service businesses struggle to achieve viability, given small population bases and limited economic activity. The commercial districts of both towns display visible decline. Storefronts sit empty, buildings show deferred maintenance and, an overall atmosphere of stagnation prevails. These failing commercial cores fail to provide either economic opportunity or community gathering spaces where residents naturally interact and build social bonds. Population trends reveal stagnation, or, even a modest decline, which really means that not many folks are choosing to move into these communities, while some of the people who already live here are leaving for opportunities somewhere else. This kind of demographic stasis, it just prevents the injection of new energy, fresh ideas, and the economic activity that usually comes with population growth. Both North Canaan and Canaan, they suffer from a pretty fundamental identity crisis that's rooted in the collapse of the industries that once formed their economic backbone. Manufacturing jobs disappeared, agricultural employment declined, and honestly, no new industries have really stepped in to replace those lost opportunities. These communities have drifted through the decades without developing clear visions for future economic development. The towns sit in these beautiful rural settings, which, in theory, should offer real quality of life advantages. But the reality is that isolation, limited services, economic stagnation, and social problems like drunk driving tend to overshadow those natural benefits. North Canaan and Canaan, they really need comprehensive revitalization, something that tackles economic development, infrastructure investment, public safety improvements, and cultural change all at once. Piecemeal interventions that just address one symptom or another are probably going to fall short unless there's a holistic approach that deals with the root causes. Danielson carries a person's name, but honestly, it faces challenges of epidemic proportions. The community has been devastated by the opioid crisis, with fentanyl and other substances claiming lives and tearing families apart with horrifying regularity. What really sets Danielson's situation apart is just how publicly visible these drug problems have become. Drug activity occurs not just in private residences or hidden locations but, in public spaces that should serve as community assets. Parks where children should play safely sometimes host drug transactions or, honestly, even consumption. The town center and commercial districts display visible evidence of the addiction crisis through the presence of individuals in various states of impairment. This public manifestation of private suffering creates an atmosphere of disorder and danger that affects everyone. Concentrated poverty intensifies and compounds the drug crisis. Economic desperation drives some individuals towards substance abuse as an escape from difficult realities. Poverty also limits access to treatment, since uninsured or underinsured individuals just can't afford rehab programs, therapy, or medications that support recovery. The connection between economic hardship and addiction creates a vicious cycle that's extremely difficult to break. Danielson's physical appearance reflects its struggles. Downtown areas contain numerous unrepaired historic buildings that, honestly, convey abandonment rather than heritage. Facades crumble, windows remain broken, and, overall maintenance standards suggest a community lacking resources or will to preserve its built environment. These deteriorating structures become sites for drug activity, vandalism, and other problems that further degrade neighborhood quality. Despite overwhelming challenges, Danielson still manages to hold on to its community spirit and the determination of its residents. Folks here keep raising families, running their businesses, and working hard to improve things, even when the obstacles seem, just about impossible. Local organizations step up to provide services, support groups lend a hand, and honestly, individuals show real courage every day just by persevering through such tough circumstances. Still, community spirit on its own just can't overcome problems of this size. Danielson really needs significant outside investment, like in drug treatment infrastructure, economic development initiatives that create real jobs, housing rehab to improve living conditions, and social services that support families in crisis. The town's strategic location between larger cities does offer some potential for development, but to actually realize that potential, we have to address the immediate humanitarian crisis of addiction and poverty, because right now, those issues pretty much overwhelm everything else. Putnam occupies, probably the most challenging position on this list, combining geographic isolation with economic dysfunction that, honestly, creates nearly insurmountable barriers to prosperity. The town does possess a distinctive character, having cultivated a growing arts scene that really differentiates it from typical post-industrial Connecticut communities. Creative individuals have recognized Putnam's potential, establishing galleries, studios, performance spaces, and cultural venues that inject a bit of energy and hope. However, these artistic assets exist within a broader context of severe economic constraint. Putnam's unemployment rate registers at a shocking 94.53%, a figure so extreme it suggests either data anomalies or, maybe, unique circumstances beyond typical economic cycles. This extraordinary unemployment level indicates fundamental structural problems rather than temporary downturns or seasonal fluctuations. Geographic isolation amplifies economic challenges. Putnam sits far from Connecticut's major employment centers, requiring lengthy commutes for residents seeking work elsewhere. Public transportation options remain minimal, effectively requiring car ownership for accessing opportunities beyond walking distance. This isolation creates a spatial poverty trap where residents lack local employment but also face significant barriers to reaching jobs elsewhere. The distance from economic centers also limits business development potential. Entrepreneurs hesitate to locate enterprises in Putnam, given the distance from suppliers, customers, and labor pools. Even businesses serving local markets struggle, considering the limited consumer spending power and small population bases. This business development deficit, it just perpetuates the employment crisis by preventing the creation of local opportunities. Putnam's creative community represents genuine hope and real accomplishment. Artists, craftspeople, and cultural workers have built something meaningful from limited resources. However, creative energy alone just can't overcome fundamental economic and geographic constraints. Artists themselves often struggle financially, unable to generate sufficient income from their creative work in a community with limited art market and tourism infrastructure. The town feels like Connecticut's final outpost before crossing into neighboring states, both geographically and, honestly, metaphorically. Its location near state lines really reinforces the sense of marginality and isolation. For residents, particularly young people with ambitions and aspirations, Putnam often represents a starting point they must leave rather than a destination where they can build futures. Putnam needs interventions that address both immediate survival needs and long-term structural positioning. Infrastructure investment improving transportation connections would, reduce isolation. Economic development initiatives leveraging creative assets could build on existing strengths. Workforce development programs could equip residents with skills matching regional opportunities. However, the scale of challenge demands sustained commitment and resources that small, economically depressed communities typically cannot self-generate.
These 15 communities reveal dimensions of Connecticut that, really contradict the popular perception of uniform prosperity. The state's reputation for wealth, education, and quality of life reflects real advantages enjoyed by significant portions of the population. However, this prosperity has not distributed evenly, leaving struggling towns and economically distressed residents behind. The challenges facing these communities are not primarily about violence, though crime certainly affects some. They are fundamentally about economic inequality, opportunity scarcity, infrastructure neglect, and the compounding effects of concentrated disadvantage. When jobs disappear, tax bases erode, limiting municipalities' ability to maintain services and infrastructure. Deteriorating conditions drive more residents to leave, further eroding the tax base in self-reinforcing cycles of decline. Connecticut's small towns deserve greater attention and more equitable resource distribution. State investment in infrastructure, education, drug treatment, and economic development should not concentrate solely in already prosperous areas. Communities experiencing genuine distress need targeted intervention that addresses root causes rather than superficial symptoms. Policy interventions really ought to recognize that different communities face different challenges, and that means they require tailored approaches. Some towns, for instance, need drug treatment and social services. Others, they require economic development and business attraction. Still others need infrastructure investment and transportation improvements. So, effective assistance must be diagnostic rather than, just a one-size-fits-all solution. These struggling communities, they also possess assets that could, honestly, form strong foundations for recovery. Historic architecture, for example, provides character and even potential tourism appeal. Natural beauty offers quality of life advantages and, of course, recreational opportunities. Creative communities, too, demonstrate resilience and resourcefulness. And let's not forget, strategic locations near transportation corridors or nestled between larger cities provide real development potential. The challenge, really, lies in activating these latent assets through appropriate investment and support. In America's wealthiest state, economic distress in small towns shouldn't just be dismissed as inevitable or, frankly, acceptable. Connecticut actually possesses sufficient resources to support all its communities. The question is, does the political will exist to distribute those resources more equitably and invest in comprehensive revitalization of struggling towns? These 15 communities deserve opportunities to thrive, not just, merely survive. Their residents demonstrate daily courage and determination, working hard to provide for families and maintain community pride despite some pretty significant obstacles. They deserve investment, attention, and policies that create real pathways from current struggles toward sustainable prosperity. Only through such commitment can Connecticut fully live up to its reputation as a state where quality of life and opportunity are available to all residents, no matter which town they call home.